What's going on, everybody? Thanks for tuning back in. Today, we're going to look at creating a basic React Quickstart project that will allow you to configure and scale properly. This project is going to use React, TypeScript, and React Router combined with some of my favorite little tips and tricks to get a base that you can start any React project with. Thankfully, the initial setup of using React and TypeScript together is extremely easy, only requiring one npm package to install. Everything else we add on top is just a bonus. Also, we will take a look at how to use React Router with TypeScript, which is most likely going to be at the heart of any React application you create. All that being said, let's hop right into it. So, as I mentioned before, starting a React project with TypeScript is extremely easy. Let's start by first installing a package by using the command npm install-g for global create-react-app. This will install a package that you can run like a console command. Once it's installed, go ahead and run create react app, then follow it up with the directory you want it to be installed in. If you want to install it into the directory you are currently working in, just use a period like so. If not, you should provide a name for the directory to create. Follow that up with a -- template equals TypeScript. Create React app can use a variety of templates depending on what you are looking for, but for now, this is the one that we need. Let's meet back up when this is finished installing. It could take a few minutes depending on your computer or your internet connection. Now that we've set up our basic React template, let's go ahead and install React Router DOM as well as the types. Run npm install react-router-dom and then an npm install -- save dev at types React Router DOM, just like you would for any other TypeScript types. This should install everything we need for routing. So if you open up the source folder, you'll see everything that has been installed for you. You'll notice that since we are using TypeScript, the ending of the files are .ts and .tsx instead of the normal JavaScript extensions. Let's go ahead and run an npm start and see the project in action. If we open up the browser to the localhost on port 3000, you'll see a basic React project working. Now let's go ahead and pause this and take a look back at our project. The index file here is the entry point for React. So we're going to leave this file, but we are going to delete the rest of these files that I select here. We don't need them. We're going to keep the index and remove the app.js element and the imports from it as well. To set up our basic configuration, we will create a couple folders: config, interface, and pages. After this, we are going to create a file called application.tsx. The purpose of this file is to be the backbone of our React project. This is where you would load all of your initial states, contexts, and everything else needed by your project. If you had authentication, for example, you would check here as the routing is going to be done from the start of this file. But we aren't doing authentication here, so let's not worry about it. We can start with the standard import React with a capital from React. Now, there's two styles of components I can stick to when creating components in React. You can use classes and you can use React hooks. There are a couple other ways to do it, but these are the two main ways. I like to use React hooks as it's the more modern framework. Since we are using TypeScript, we have to declare what type of each variable is. Declare a constant application and then assign the type to it using the colon for TypeScript, react.function component, and then inside of the chevrons, you can just pass in an empty object for now. If you want to pass in any specific props, you would have to create an interface including that prop and insert it here. We're going to do this with our pages, so you will see how it works in a bit. All function components need to return some sort of JSX element, so let's go ahead and return a simple div with a message on the inside. You can put anything you want here for now. After that, we can export default the application component at the bottom like so. If we go back to our index file, we can import our application file here as a JSX element, and then we can run the npm start again, and then we can see that our changes have been pushed through. So let's go ahead and open the browser and see what happens. So now when I go to this link, you'll see that the project is updated accordingly. So now it's time to put in place some simple configuration. I like to create a config file and export a config object inside of it. Variables declared here should not be sensitive. What I mean by that is that you should not be putting in sensitive information like encryption keys, passwords, or anything like that. If you want to do things like that, you need to use the environment variables and not plain text. You can pass in environment variables here and then put them inside the config object like I do in some of my other projects, but we're not going to worry about this here either. I'm going to put a defaults namespace variable here that I'm going to be using for my logging. So now let's go ahead and create a logging.ts file. Inside of it, I'm going to import the configuration at the top from our config file. And then I'm going to go ahead and create a variable called default_namespace, and I'm going to make it equal to the config variable inside of my config. I'm going to use this for my logging in case the user doesn't provide a namespace. For the logging functions, I'm going to copy and paste this from another project to save some time. The logging works as follows. The user can pass in a message or a message and a namespace. The namespace option allows you to figure out where messages are coming from. You can also pass in any object type for the message, and the functions will figure out how to log them properly based on whether or not they are a string. Let's move on to the interfaces. We're going to make two interfaces. The first one is going to be in a file called route.ts, and you can go ahead and declare this with an export default interface iRoute. This interface is going to define the routes we will use for React Router. We need 5 variables here, and the variables that we are going to need is the path of type string, the name of type string, we're going to have a component of type any, we're going to have exact of type boolean, and then we're going to have an optional props of type any. So the path is going to be the path in the URL after whatever domain you're using. So for example, localhost / is going to be the home page, and then / about is going to be the about page. The name is going to be the actual name of the page. That can be used inside of the logging. That's what we're going to pass through in our props. You can use it as the document title. You can do whatever you want with it. The component is going to be the actual component we're exporting. So for example, when we exported the application, that is an example of a component. Exact is whether or not the routing path has to be exact. And then props is just any extra props you want to pass in when we make the routes configuration. Next, let's create a page.ts file in our interfaces folder. This interface is only going to have one variable for now, and we can just pass in the name variable, which is going to be a string. And I will use this to show you how props work with lifecycle methods. So the next thing we're going to do is create a page called home.tsx. This is going to be one of 2 pages we're going to be creating today. So let's get right into it. We're going to start by doing 3 imports. First, we're going to import React from React as we did before. We're going to import the iPage interface from the interfaces page. And we're going to import logging from our config logging file. Now, much like we did for our application, we're going to create a const home page. This is also going to be a React function component. But inside the chevrons, you're going to pass in the iPage for props, which means that our props variable will have the name on it. Inside of our function component, you can go ahead and just return some text. I'm just going to return, this is the home page with a simple HTML paragraph. And then the next thing we're going to do is actually look into one of React's lifecycle methods using hooks. So if you're familiar with React classes, you'll know that you can use the component did mount, the component will mount, etc. Here you use something called useEffect with a dependency array, and that determines when this function is called after a state change. So if you use useEffect with an empty array like we're going to be using here, this doesn't depend on any variables, so it's just going to trigger one time. If you don't pass in a dependency array, useEffect will trigger every time a state is changed. And if you do pass in variables, the useEffect will only be triggered every time that variable changes. So if you were to pass in just your props, for example, nothing would happen because when your props change, your component's going to get re-rendered. So it will still only happen one time. So let's go ahead and inside of this useEffect, we're going to use an empty dependency array. And we're going to just put in a little logging function here. And what we're going to do is we're going to say loading, and then I'm going to pass in the props.name variable so that when we run this, you can see it inside of the console. Once we're done with all that, you can go ahead and export default your home page. We're going to create a second page. We're going to call it about.tsx. And let's just copy and paste everything from our home page and put it in our about page and change our home page variable to an about page variable. And in the return text, just say this is the about page. This page can be named anything you want, but it's going to be my second page example. Well, eventually I'm going to show you how to actually pass in some extra URL props. But for now, we'll just do the about page to keep it simple. Now that we have our pages set up, we actually have to start setting up our React router. So how we do that is first I'm going to define some routes, and then we're going to go to our application page and we're going to render them all properly. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a routes.ts file inside of our config folder. Inside of it, you can go ahead and import the iRoute from the interfaces route file. And then you're going to make a variable called const routes. It's going to be of a type iRoute an array, and you're going to make that equal to an array, and we're going to fill out some entries inside of it. So the first object is going to have a path of just a /. The name is going to be the home page. The component is going to be our home page component, and it should auto import here if you're using Visual Studio Code. And we're going to set the exact to true because we want the path to be exact, and we're not going to pass in any props because we don't really need them. I'm going to copy and paste this and change everything for the about page as I did for the home page. And once I have these two things filled out, I'm going to export default routes at the bottom of my page. So basically what I'm going to do is that anytime I'm going to create a new file or a new page or something you want to be routed, the reason why I set this up here is so all you have to do is put it into this file, and then any page, like the application page, that's going to need information about the routes can get everything from a single array. It keeps it all in one place for you. So inside of your application page, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and start modifying this to use React Router. What we're going to do is we're first going to import. We're going to put some empty braces here from React Router DOM, and we're going to import 4 things. We want a browser router, a route, a switch, and root component props. These are all the things we're going to need to make React Router and TypeScript work together. I'm going to throw in a use effect here that just says loading application with some logging. And inside of my return function, I'm going to start switching things around. So I'm going to make my return function look as follows. I'm going to start with some divs. Inside of the div, I'm going to put a browser router, open and close. Inside of that browser router, I'm going to put a switch because the route style I'm using is going to be a switch. And inside of this is where we're going to put our routes. Now, you can define your routes manually by putting your home page here and your about page here. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to map them or for loop them in a sense to do it automatically from that routes file that I created. So how we're going to do that is we're going to use a map. We're going to type in routes.map. Inside of it, there's going to be a function. Inside of that function, we're going to have a route and index prop. And that function is going to return a route. Now, to define the route, we're going to need a few things here. First, anytime you're mapping something in React or in JSX specifically, you're going to have a key in every item that you're mapping. So every item in the loop has to have a key. So we're going to make that key equal to the index. The index prop is automatically incrementing and is provided to us by the map function. After the key, let's go ahead and add our path being equal to our route.path. After the path, we're going to make our exact be equal to route.exact. So you can see everything I put in the route interface is actually being used here by the route component from React Router DOM. Now, in order to render custom components or pass in custom props, you're going to have to use the render, and inside of it, we're going to pass in a function, and that function is going to have a props key, which is going to be defined by root component props, and inside of the chevrons, you can put any. So this is how you define this in TypeScript. A lot of people have issue with this right here, but this is an easy, hacky way to get around everything. And we're going to make this equal and return to a root.component. We're going to pass in the props, and we're going to pass in the route props. So everything should be passed into the root properly. Now we can go ahead and run an npm start, and let's see what actually happens inside of our application. So you can see that it's rendering this is the home page because we're at just the / URL. And when I paste in the about URL up here, it says this is the about page. So that part is working properly. Now you'll notice that if I check the console here, you'll see that it says loading application, which is coming from the application file, but you'll see that it says loading undefined. It's not telling me that it's loading the about page. Now that's because I forgot to pass in the name prop. So let me go back and show you how to do that. So if we go back to where our root.component is being rendered, let's go ahead and pass in a name prop being equal to route.name. And just like that, everything should work. So let's go ahead and save it and then refresh. And you'll see that once I do that, it says loading about page. So now this is working properly and the props are being passed in through the map function. Now you'll see that you get these warnings here when you're using React in strict mode, and that it says React hook is use effect has a missing dependency. So if you want to change that, you can actually go to the dependency array and add your props.name. It's still going to work the exact same way because your props are only passed in one time. So if I go ahead and save that, you'll see that one of the warnings has disappeared. So if I go to the home page and do the same thing, you'll see that all my warnings go away. That's not necessary. You can ignore them because it works the exact same way. But if you just want to clean everything up, that is how you do it. So now that our routing is working properly, we're going to do two more things. First, I'm going to show you how to pass in some extra props in the URL, and then I'm going to show you how to use a link to actually route between pages without actually leaving the React application. Because anytime you type in a URL into the address bar, it acts like you're hitting the React app for the first time. You want to actually use something called a link inside of React Router that switches the pages for you without actually leaving the web page. So first, let's take care of passing in some extra parameters, and then we'll look at the link. So I'm going to go to my about page and I'm going to add my parameters here. So how you're going to do this is actually, the first thing I'm going to do is declare a state variable. So I'm going to make a const message and then a set message for the changing function equal to use state. It's going to be of a type string, and the initial state is just going to be an empty string. Next, I'm going to change my props from iPage to and route component props any, so that way I can access my match parameters. And you'll see what I mean in a second. I'm going to change my export default to with router, and then inside of that pass the about page. Now inside of my use effect, I'm going to let's say let my number be equal to my props dot match dot params and then dot number. So what this is going to do is going to assume that I have a parameter called number. If I do have it, I'm going to set my message to be equal to, you could just put something like the number is and then whatever your parameter is. So I'm just going to do that inside of a nice little string text here. And then I'm going to make an else statement and just say that no number was provided. And that should be enough to actually set the message. And then inside of my return, instead of this is the about page, I'm going to put, let's just say the message right here. So initially there won't be anything, but it will figure out pretty quickly which one of these messages to render. So if I run npm start right now and I go back to my web page, let's take a look at what happens. So if I have my about URL here and I do a / and then pass in a number, you'll see that nothing happens. And that's actually because we have to make the React router understand that we want that number parameter. So in order to do that, first, let's actually just change our dependency array to props here just to get rid of that message. And now let's go to our routes.ts file and make a small modification. We're going to go to the path of about and we're going to add a /, a colon, and then number. That way now it understands that when we have the about path, we have to include a number with it. Let's save it and then go back to our browser. You'll see that it's declaring that the number is 4. If I change that to a 10, the number is 10. So now it's taking in the parameters from my URL nicely. The home page still works. Awesome. Let's go to the about page now and add a link to show you how to change pages inside of your React application. So this is another key component of the React router, is using the link. So if I go back to my about page, inside of my return here, I'm going to change this to some divs. I'm going to put my message back in, but then I'm going to add the link. I'm going to make this go to, and for now we'll just do a / so it just links to the home page. And inside of my link text, I'm going to just say go to the home page. So whenever you click it, it routes you to the home page. So let's go to my about page. And let's open up the console, and you can see, take a look, that it's still loading the about page in the application. Everything's going fine. You'll see that it says loading application. If that only shows up one time when you start switching pages and it doesn't show up again, that means your link is working properly. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the home page, and it says loading home page. So you'll see that it didn't load the application again. The application's already loaded. It's just switching the pages for me through the router now. So that's working properly as well. So finally, the last thing I want to do is I also want to render the about page, but without the number. So I want to see what happens if I can get that message that no number is provided if they don't actually pass in a number. So I'm just going to copy this, paste it, and then I'm just going to get rid of the number prop in the first about link, save it, and then see what happens. So let's go back to the page. And then when I go to my about page, it's going to tell me that no number was provided. And just like that, everything is working just the way we want it to. So that's it, guys. That's React, TypeScript, React Router, and a little bit of extra configuration to help you scale in a nutshell. It only took about 20 minutes, but having a project like this can save you loads of time, especially if you are making more than one project, or you're someone who designs websites, or you're just looking for a good base to start your project off of. If you have any questions or concerns, please post them in the comments below, or a video you would like to see. I'm also always open to that as well. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.